today. Women in Leadership 2018. How many of you have been here since the creation of this event? Raise your hand. Awesome. So it's grown now to so many people. When I look out here, guys, I just feel so empowered, so elevated, so encouraged. And thank you so much for being here. I salute you all, and I'm so excited to share my next guest with you. As mentioned, I'm Hermoine Noble, and I will be your host for this fire chat. It is going to be exciting, and I can't wait for you to meet my next guest. She's a highly accomplished woman. She is an advocate, speaker, and entrepreneur, and she's the first Indian American to become Miss America in 2014. She's been featured on CNN, Out Front with Erin Burnett, Anderson Cooper 360, MSNBC, BBC World, The Wall Street Journal. Guys, the list goes on. Please put your hands together and welcome my next guest, Miss Nina Davalori.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome and intro, Hermione. It's so great to be here.
It's awesome to have you. So Nina, you're an advocate for women across various platforms. To be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, I meet a lot of people and I interview a lot of people every day. And I was so excited to meet Nina because of what she does. Can you tell us where it all began?
Oh my goodness. I suppose I'll kind of start from the beginning and leading up to Miss America. So I was actually born in I was born in Syracuse, New York. And my grandparents raised me in the small town of Vijayawada in South India for 2 years. So my first spoken language was Telugu, which is a South Indian dialect, and then moved back to Oklahoma, where my family was living at the time when I was about 4 years old. So growing up, I had a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions about my culture, who I was, where I came from. I would get several questions about if I worship cows, what does the red dot mean? Your house smells like curry, which is kind of true. But I think I realized growing up that so many of these remarks weren't necessarily meant to be malicious, but really simply due to the fact of ignorance. So constantly finding myself in conversations with classmates, correcting those stereotypes, being an advocate for myself, and recognizing that these stereotypes followed me really everywhere I went. My family moved to Michigan when I was 10, and then I went to University of Michigan, and this was something that was just always a part of conversation. And so before I even competed in Miss America, I had already started working with my platform, which is called Celebrating Diversity Through Cultural Competency, and winning Miss America certainly elevated that, and I was able to spread it not only across the country, but internationally as well.
That's amazing. So we're just going to run some footage. Team down the back, can we play the video footage of the crowning moment on when Nina was crowned Miss America in 2014? Let's have a look. I've got it coming up on the screen. And she's going to share more about this moment in particular. So as you guys have seen on television, there's a lot of tears, there's a lot of emotions, because it takes a lot to actually make it to this platform. And it's absolutely awesome when you just watch it. It's so inspiring. This is the moment she received the crown. She was announced as Miss America in 2014. Nina, tell us about that exact moment that we're seeing on screen.
It's so hard to put this into words. Like, I'm just hysterical. Those are my parents.
Mom and dad?
Mom and dad. Your mind really does truly go blank in this moment because you're trying to remember so many things. And I think for me, I just remember right before this moment, what you guys didn't catch, those are all my friends, they're going crazy. But right before this moment, I remember the MC came by and she said, what are you guys thinking? And as I was holding hands with my runner-up, and I said, you know what, no matter what, I'm really proud because we're both making history. Actually, I was holding hands with Crystal Lee, whose family immigrated from China. So both of us were standing there as two Asian Americans representing a competition like Miss America, and it was just such a milestone, and I think winning was just certainly icing on the cake.
Beautiful. I love seeing that video, and your tears. I almost burst out in tears watching it the first time because it was so inspirational. Just by a show of hands, ladies and gentlemen, tell me, have any of you experienced sexism or racism, personally or professionally? Raise your hand. I know most of us have actually, and even men as well. It's not just for women when it comes to sexism. Nina, you faced a backlash of racism and comments. People were really nasty. I actually got to watch some of it yesterday, and ladies and gentlemen, it really hurt me that that sort of thing still happens in 2018, 2014 when she actually was crowned, but even today. Can you tell us about some of those experiences and how you chose to handle them and respond?
Absolutely. You know, the night I won, I remember there was quite a few tweets and a lot of comments on social media calling me a terrorist, saying, you know, I was un-American. 9/11 was 2 days ago, and we, you know, crowned a Muslim as Miss America. Also, I think I was called Miss 7-Eleven. But so many, I think that was kind of the point why my platform was what it was. It was just very timely to say this is exactly an opportunity that I'm going to take to use to educate, because you can't fight fire with fire. I've always seen myself as first and foremost American, but I think really being able to address those stereotypes and create this inclusive conversation, because at the end of the day, not all of us are going to agree with one another, because that's just not realistic or ideal, but we can absolutely respect one another and have open and honest conversations. And so that's really the basis of cultural competency. I think what I recognize that even throughout my travels that I didn't necessarily see coming, you know, I assumed that there would be some form of criticism, you know, should I win Miss America? But as I was traveling across the country, speaking and advocating, you know, I would hear comments like I was speaking at a school, and one of the young girls that was there, this was, you know, probably 14, 15 years old, a group that I was speaking with, she said, well, don't you have to be white to be Miss America? And I thought, you know what, if I can change her opinion and her mind of what it even means to be an American, you know, maybe that's you know, why I'm here today. You know, also in terms of, I've been really trying to unpack this idea of sexism and kind of stepping into this role as Miss America. I think, unfortunately, there's always a stereotype, not only as a woman, but with being involved in the pageant world, I think, and in the beauty industry. There's a lot of layers that are added onto it. And, you know, I remember I was on a flight heading to actually speak at Harvard Business School, and the gentleman next to me, I was reading The Economist, which is, you know, a magazine that I typically read, didn't think anything of it. And he said, oh, honey, why are you reading that? That's a man's world. And I said, okay, thank you. And even one of, you know, most recently, now that I'm building a beauty brand and just launched June 1st, you know, there was a potential investor that I was speaking with, and he said, oh, and you know, you're so dark. And I thought, if I were a male, you would never have commented on my skin tone or even related that to, you know, what I was doing and continuing as an entrepreneur. So I think it's important that we have these conversations, and I think as we, you know, hear them, we have to be able to address them.
I just applaud you for being so strong and handling those comments with such grace and excellence. Everybody, just a round of applause for that, because you can choose to be angry, you can choose to get all upset and say nasty comments, but she just handled it with such grace, and I think that's beautiful. Now, Nina, you're a great advocate for diversity in general. You're also helping to work with governments, Republican and Democrats, to help empower women in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, as well as other industries as well. Can you tell me about how you advocate for diversity?
Yes, so one of the things that also encompasses in diversity is also STEM education, specifically women in STEM, you know, related fields. There's such especially in America, we see a lack of women entering those fields, and so that was one of the, you know, issues I suppose I took on during my year. And I think making it relatable, I think we find that unfortunately, if we're not introduced to these fields at a young age, we kind of lose interest in them. And so speaking with, you know, young elementary school, you know, girls, I suppose, I would say one of the things I was able to do was, you know, I'm a science major. You know, I was a graduate student instructor for chemistry, and I was actually able to go into a lab and create my own lip gloss, and sort of kind of introducing them to different avenues of what STEM is, aside from the doctor or the engineer, which are great avenues to pursue. I have to say, I'm the black sheep in my family. My parents will always say, "Have you met my other daughter?" she's a doctor. So I think, kind of having that background was really helpful, and I think I've always also said it from the stance that it's really important to be well-rounded, to be able to, walk into any room and to be able to talk about a variety of subjects is really important. So yes, maybe STEM is not what you're interested in, but it affects our daily lives constantly. So especially now, technology, apps are at our fingertips. So it's so important that we teach our young children that.
Now, Nina, you are absolutely gorgeous. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm up close and I can tell you she is so radiant, so beautiful. Can you tell me what are the biggest misconceptions you find about women, that are said about women in leadership, especially now, because you're not just Miss America, a former Miss America, you're also an entrepreneur and a businesswoman. So like you were saying, that gentleman said to you, that's a man's world. What do you think are the most common misconceptions as you travel around the world and you meet different people and governments?
Yeah, I've definitely found that that stereotype of you can either be smart or pretty is certainly still exists. And I really dislike saying that because I feel like, it's not always there, but I've realized and recognized when I've walked into certain rooms, I will always say that, Miss America has gotten me into certain rooms, and I recognize that, but I've had to prove that I belong in that room, and I constantly find myself, leading with my education, presenting myself from that scholastic standpoint, and at some point I thought, even in creating a beauty brand, this was a huge part of this, because I remember I was very conflicted even launching this, because I said, if I launch a beauty brand, is that going to diminish the message that I've worked so hard to cultivate? I had worked and continue to work with the Obama administration. I had done so much speaking and advocacy with colleges, universities on diversity, the list goes on. And I thought, if I get myself involved in beauty, well, then everyone's going to say, oh, of course, well, Miss America, she launched a beauty brand. And I was very conflicted with that. And so I remember sitting down and I thought to myself, no, at the end of the day, there's so much more to what I'm doing in terms of especially what I'm launching. And it was really targeting this whole idea of empowerment. Mm-hmm. And I had to sit down and ask myself the question, what does empowerment really mean? A lot of companies, a lot of people are throwing this word around now more than ever. And for me, the core of that was truly education. How can we actually actively educate women around the world? And as I was developing Avrani, which is my skincare line, core to it was a social impact mission. Mm-hmm. And so we continue to work with organizations. Our first one specifically is the Shanti Bhavan School, which mentors mm-hmm. children and young women in education in India. And so as we continue to grow and expand, that is going to be integral to our mission. But I think focusing on everything that I had done and really thinking about what empowerment is, there was a way to tie this together mm-hmm. And be in both worlds and actually, and even from an investment standpoint, present it as such. Mm-hmm.
That's so awesome. We're going to come back to that. Friends, we have a special competition that we're going to announce, which is going to be on social media. So if you're not on social media, you need to get on the Will's social media, because Nina is going to be giving away some special packages of her new skincare line, which I'm going to come to in a moment. But before we get there, I just want to ask you, Nina, what it was like to work with Michelle Obama, because you also collaborated on the Let's Move campaign. Did you achieve your goals? What was that like? Tell us more.
Oh, it was amazing. I have to say, the first time I met President Obama and started working with the administration, I remember I was actually there with Children's Miracle Network, which is an incredible nonprofit organization that exists in US and Canada that provides medical treatment for children who are undergoing serious illnesses, cancer treatments, and they cover all the costs that their families cannot cover. And so I was there on behalf of them, and I remember President Obama came out and had a very nice question and answer session with the families and the children, and he was staged to take a picture next to me, and he said, "Oh, congratulations, Miss America, we're so proud of you." And I thought, great, that's my moment with the president. And then I was actually pulled aside by his chief of staff, and he had said, "Nina, would you like to meet the president?" And I said, uh-huh. And so I realize I'm being led to the Oval Office, and I see President Obama waiting there. And he said, "Oh, Nina, yes, please come join me." And I remember thinking, okay, Barack, sure. And so that was definitely probably a moment that my parents thought I had a legitimate job, was having that meeting. And so from there, not only was I able to work with the First Lady Michelle on the Let's Move campaign, which is something that I had spoken openly about healthy lifestyle and fitness. It's certainly encompassed into many conversations I've had. But furthering that, actually working with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans. And we launched anti-bullying campaigns called Act to Change across the country, especially targeting South Asian Americans, because we are bullied more due to our religion and our heritage and backgrounds. And then also being able to tie that work in together with education of the girl child. So also worked with Let Girls Learn, her more recent campaign. So it's been a wonderful, exciting relationship, probably the only people I've really truly fangirled over. And so that was definitely a milestone in terms of advocacy work.
Thanks for sharing, Nina. Now onto the skincare range. Now, I've been looking at some business models, obviously, that have been launched recently, and those of you who are in the business industry or even looking at it from an economic perspective, you probably are familiar with Rihanna, who launched Fenty Beauty, and she's one of the first brands, I think, that has come out with a variety of shades and tones for foundation for women of very diverse backgrounds, and even men, if you want to wear makeup. So, Nina, when you decided to launch a skincare range and enter this beauty industry, what niche were you hoping to fill, or what inspired you, and what did you feel was missing in the market already that would then, your brand will be able to make up for it or meet those needs?
Yeah, and like I said, launching this was a culmination of so many of my experiences, and I'll kind of touch on a few, but I'll tie it together, hopefully. But I think first and foremost, I recognized that there was not a brand that really truly spoke to me in terms of beauty. And I say that because I grew up in a culture that, and I think many of us in this room understand, that being, light-skinned was the beauty ideal. The more fair you are, the more beautiful you are, typically considered. And so, I grew up, I'm a darker-skinned South Asian, and, I grew up with comments, don't go out in the sun, you're going to get too dark, or, oh, you would be so much prettier if you were lighter. And I remember even one of this gentleman, gentleman is a debatable word, but this gentleman that I was seeing in college, he said, "Oh, I think if I introduce you to my mother, she's going to say that you're too dark for me." The morning after I won Miss America, I remember reading international headlines that said, "Is Miss America too dark to be Miss India?" And I told you about my most recent encounter with a potential investor. And so I remember thinking when I read that headline, well, first of all, I didn't want to be Miss India. I wanted to be Miss America. But that being said, this is so deep-seated in our culture. And not only did I notice it just in terms of beauty standards, actually one of the other things that I worked with the Obama administration is that I did a tour with the State Department between US and India. We toured 14 days and visited 3 different cities. And I remember, talking about diversity and beauty and education was kind of the impetus behind this trip. And I remember seeing this woman clearly working in the fields who was walked up to a stand on the streets and was buying a 5 rupee packet of Fair and Lovely for her daughter and told her in Telugu, "So you don't have the life that I do." And it's incredibly frustrating to see that for me because I grew up in a family, my family came from India, and the only reason I'm sitting in this seat today here is because of my education. And we are just a living testament of what education can be for children in India. And so to see this actively happen as I'm trying to really advocate for this was just very eye-opening because I think change, when you realize where change needs to happen, it's not in these rooms where we're having wonderful conversations, because this is very important. We really need to reach those rural areas and villages that simply aren't here, that we're simply don't have access to these conversations necessarily. And so I think in terms with launching of Rani, that was really the core of it, that we're going to spread this message, because you see huge brands like Fair and Lovely kind of dominating this market. We're going to spread this message that your skin is beautiful regardless of the skin type, tone, texture, and obviously having a platform like Miss America, someone who whose family's from India, and being able to break the stereotype, break the mold, and hopefully break beauty standards. I hope that this is a message that will start to resonate with not only people in America, which I definitely see the grassroots level happening, but of course spreading that on a more broader term. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to happen overnight, but that is definitely the mission of really why launching of Rani happened. And of course, again, like I mentioned, tying in that component of social impact and education.
That's awesome. So this year's theme is Stretch and Strive for More for Women in Leadership Economic Forum. Can you tell me, what are your dreams personally and professionally behind all of this, Nina? Share with us more about your personal and professional dreams for yourself.
Yeah, I think as I remember we kind of had a brief chat before this, and I was thinking about this question. I want to acknowledge that sometimes it seems really simple when you're sitting in this room and hearing my story. I think a lot of people have this misconception of, I won Miss America and then everything else just kind of happened. And that's truly not the case. I feel everything that I've done had to happen from the grassroots level. From winning Miss America, I don't think I would have said, 5 years later, I'm going to be in Dubai talking about launching a brand. That's just not where I would have said. But after I'd won, I had wanted to continue pursuing the hosting industry. And so then I was approached by ZTV, which wanted to put together a reality show of helping young other South Asian millennial women like myself kind of break this mold and stereotype. And so even with that, it was really starting from the ground up again, building, in another sort of industry avenue. And then again, with launching a brand, it was again starting from the ground up of building. So there's so many behind the scenes, heavy lifting and work that goes into a lot of things that people have done, whereas when you talk about it, you think it happens so quickly, but it's really not. So I think it's hard for me to answer that question of what's going to happen in 5 years, or what do I hope for myself. I think the one thing I keep telling myself that I've tried to live by is that I've seen oftentimes when some people reach some form of success, or what society defines as success, it gives them an opportunity to coast. It gives them an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to sit back, I've done this, and that was great. Instead of continuing to recognize, okay, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I have to start from the bottom and start again to build myself up to the top. And I'm still feel like I'm continuing to build and starting from the bottom in different areas and different avenues. And so I think we all have to be to challenge ourselves to do that, and recognize that we're not the experts in every field all the time, but there's always a way if you really truly believe in something.
Now, it's very interesting also being in the media myself, and as a news anchor, a lot of the times when you're doing news and you're doing business, people see you and they're like, why don't you sing? Why don't you become an actor? Why don't you do, Hollywood films? That's what people will ask you. So naturally, after you won the Miss America, people came to you and probably said, why don't you do Bollywood? We were discussing this just before we came on stage. Nina, share your answer with the audience, please.
Yes, there's such a stereotype that, the clear path entering Miss America was going to be Bollywood for me. And that just wasn't the route that I wanted to go. I think, unfortunately, Miss America really is a service and scholarship-based organization. And for me, it created a platform of advocacy and creating something beyond just a pretty face and value. And I think there's also I think truly the way I saw it is that my family immigrated to America to provide opportunities that were unattainable otherwise through Bollywood. And so that was something that I wanted to stay true to myself, and to encourage other young women that even though sometimes there might be a stereotypical path, it's not always the right path, and you have to continue to really do what's best for you.
That's awesome. Friends, I want to turn it over to you. Can we have a microphone on the 4 team? And anyone that has a question, please raise your hand and we'll take a microphone over to you if you have a question for Nina. Don't feel shy. Yes. We have a question over there to the right-hand side. If you could please just stand up, please. And we have a microphone coming over to you now for questions. If you could please share your name and your question.
Hello, I'm Leah from Italy. Thank you very much for all your inspiring words. I was very touched when you spoke about all the bad things were written to you after your wonderful winning. How personally did you face with it? Because a lot of young women I met in my life and in my experience, sometimes they can break when they are overwhelmed with very bad attacks like that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It was hard. I think the bigger issue is we live in a time right now where it's so easy to hide behind a handle on social media, to send out a tweet, to write a comment on Instagram without thinking twice about how that comment affects others. And for me, I was very lucky in a sense where for every one negative comment, tweet, post, I received hundreds, if not thousands of words of positive encouragement from other people across the world supporting my message. And so I really think whenever we see something as bystanders, whenever we see something wrong that's happening or that we disagree with, it is our job to stand up and say that's not right. Because I think a lot of positive voices are so much more impactful than one negative voice. And it will certainly make that one person or that one comment, hopefully they will rethink that action in the future when they see that.
Mm-hmm. Personally, for me, I faced a lot of sexism as a woman in leadership, as a business owner, and in the beginning it used to really shock me. People would say, well, you're a woman, and are you the owner of the company? I would get comments like that all the time, and I think over time, you build a certain resilience and you press on because you have a dream. Like we're all here and we have a dream to see more women empowered, more women on boards, more women launching companies and joining government. And because we have that dream and we have that spirit, to achieve that goal, men and women, not just women, I think that's what keeps you pressing on when you do get hurt. But even though you conceal it, you do get hurt on the inside. And you sometimes wonder how people can just say horrible things and just words of death. It doesn't help anybody or uplift the situation. Any other questions just before we close? I have a guest over there. Please raise your hand and stand up, please. The microphone's coming to you now.
Hi, Nina. Thanks for sharing your story. One of the stories you shared that I really loved was the fact that you created your own lip gloss. That's very inspiring. You also talked about the work you did while you were Miss America with encouraging young girls in STEM. What were some of the things that you observed and some best practices from that journey?
I think the biggest thing is that a lot of times, especially with middle school girls, ages 10 to 12 or 13, 14, I would say, a lot of them would say, oh, well, I'm just not good at it. I'm just not good at math. I'm just not good at science. And then it's interesting because also the conversation that I was having with parents, because they are part of the conversation and an important part of them, an important part of it too, is one of them was telling me, he said, I told my son that he can, one day build, skyscrapers and become an architect and all of these things. And my daughter was sitting next to me and she said, well, what about me, Dad? And so it's interesting because I think I've learned along the way that it's not only a balance of, I think schools play an integral part as well, that introducing these programs, because research has shown that unfortunately children lose interest in these fields as early as age 10 if they're not exposed to it from younger and younger ages. And then also, I think obviously parents play a role in it. And then in addition to that, I think colleges and universities, once they enter that high school age, 15, 16, where they're thinking about career paths, I think also administrators need to show different avenues of what children, and students can pursue outside of maybe what they think is the stereotype. So really thinking outside of the box in terms of what STEM-related fields are and how they can have programs implemented to gauge children's interests from a young age.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that question. That's bringing us to the end of our session, ladies and gentlemen. Remember to follow us on social media, The Will One, that's on Instagram. We have an announcement for a special competition for Nina's latest skincare range where you can win, and that's for gentlemen as well. So if you take care of your skin, or if you want to get it for your wife, girlfriend, whoever you'd like to get that for, even a friend, or even me. Anyway, guys, that brings us to the end of this session. Our speaker, advocate, entrepreneur, and first Indian American to become Miss America in 2014. Please put your hands together for my guest, Nina Davalori.
Thank you so much.